the stagecoach rattled to a halt, coughing up a storm of dust that hung thick in the air like smoke after a gunfight. Clara May pressed a hand to the brim of her faded bonnet, trying to steady her breath as the driver tossed her battered carpetbag down onto the dirt road. She had traveled hundreds of miles with only that bag, a letter, and a promise that someone was waiting for her at journey's end. The promise now felt thinner than the dress clinging to her in the August heat. The driver muttered something about the next town and cracked the reins, leaving her alone as the coach wheels spun away in a blur. When the dust cleared, Clara found herself standing in the center of a place that seemed carved out of grit and suspicion. The wooden storefronts leaned like tired men, their paint sun-bleached and peeling. A saloon door slapped back and forth in the hot wind. A sign nailed crookedly to the general store squeaked, its chain straining like it might snap, but it wasn't. The buildings that chilled her, it was the people. Men lounged against posts, spurs glinting in the fading sun, their eyes flicking to her and then away as if she were nothing worth noticing. Women on the boardwalk paused in their gossip to glare at her bonnet, their voices lowering into cutting whispers. One laughed behind a gloved hand. Another spat into the street, her eyes locked on Clara as if to say, "You don't belong here." Clara tightened her grip on the letter, the ink smudged from being unfolded too many times. It was supposed to be her proof that someone in this forsaken town wanted her, that she had a place, a purpose. But as the minutes bled into hours, the boardwalk emptied and the man she was meant to marry never appeared. The truth settled over her like a heavy noose. She had been left. A freight wagon rattled past, its driver giving her no more than a glance before turning his horses toward the livery. A boy carrying a sack of grain darted by, slowing just long enough to stare before his mother yanked him along by the arm. Even the stray dog skulking near the saloon seemed to regard her as another piece of refuse dropped in the dust. Clara shifted from foot to foot, the heat of the boards beneath her shoes seeping upward. A hollow ache clawed at her chest. She had dreamed that her arrival would be met with open arms or at the very least, recognition. Instead, she stood like an unwanted parcel dumped at the town's doorstep. The sun sank lower, bleeding orange. Across the horizon, still, no one came. A man in a vest and badge, likely the sheriff, stepped out of the office across the street. He looked her over in one slow, measuring sweep, then tipped his hat without warmth. "Evenin', ma'am," he said, though the words carried no welcome. His eyes narrowed slightly at the letter clutched in her hand. Then, without waiting for a reply, he turned away as if she were another problem he didn't care to handle. Mouth had gone dry. She tried to swallow, but the lump of dread stuck fast in her throat. By the time the shadows stretched long across the street, Clara had moved her carpetbag to the steps of the livery stable. The wood was rough and splintered beneath her fingers, the smell of manure sharp in her nose. She sat stiff-backed, forcing herself not to cry. To weep here, under the gaze of people who already despised her, would be a kind of death. The silence grew heavier with each passing moment, broken only by the slam of doors and the occasional drunken shout from the saloon. The town seemed to breathe as one body, each exhale pushing her further toward the edge of despair. She had crossed half a continent to escape a life of emptiness, only to find herself in a place that might be worse. As night crept over the rooftops and the oil lamps flickered to life, Clara realized the most terrifying part. She wasn't simply unwanted. She was alone. Utterly, dangerously alone in a town that had no use for her and perhaps no mercy either. Clara May did not sleep that first night. She sat upright on the livery step, her carpetbag clutched to her chest as if it were a shield. The moonlight fell over the town, silvering the rooftops, but every creak and shuffle in the shadows made her harder. A horse stamped inside the stable. A door slammed somewhere down the street. Beyond that, only silence. When dawn came, the sun rose sharp and unforgiving, as though it meant to scorch weakness right out of the earth. Clara stood, stiff and dusty, and brushed the dirt from her skirt. The town was waking, men dragging. Barrels from the saloon, women sweeping porches, children darting toward the well with tin pails. None of them spared her more than a cold glance. She was not invisible. No, she was something worse. She was noticed, measured, and dismissed. The general store's door banged open, and a broad man in a sweat-stained apron appeared, stacking crates. Clara took a hesitant step toward him, clutching the letter in her hand. "Sir," she began, her voice raw from the night air, I'm looking for Mr. John Willard. I was told he lived here." The man didn't even pause. "Don't know him," he said flatly, setting down another crate with a thud. "But the letter," she tried again, unfolding the paper, though the edges were already soft from her constant handling. The man's eyes flicked to the page, then back to her face, sharp with irritation. "Lady, we've got no shortage of drifters and liars coming through this town. Best put that paper away before folks start asking questions you don't want to answer." His words cut like a blade. Liars. Drifters. Was that what they thought? Of her? Clara folded the letter quickly, slipping it back into her bag. The weight of eyes pressed against her as she walked back toward the stable. She could feel the whispers trailing her like snakes in the dirt. By noon, the heat was brutal and her stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since the stale bread given to her at the last stage stop. Desperation pushed her toward the tea saloon. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of whiskey. Men hunched over tables, cards in their hands, guns at their hips. Conversations faltered when she entered. A few men chuckled darkly. One spat tobacco into a tin, his eyes never leaving her. Clara walked to the bar, her back straight, though her knees trembled. "Water, please," she said. The barkeep, a heavy-set man with arms like hams, gave a slow grin that held no kindness. He slid a tin cup toward her. "Ain't free," he drawled. Clara's hand shook as she dug into her bag for the small coin. Purse she had saved for emergencies. She laid down a dime. The man took it without thanks. The water was warm, metallic, but she drank it anyway. She felt the weight of the room on her, every glance heavy with judgment or amusement. She turned and left quickly, the sound of laughter nipping at her heels as the saloon doors slapped shut behind her. Back on the street, Clara's eyes darted for any sign of the man who was supposed to meet her. Nothing. No familiar face. Number. Recognition. Just more glances that stung worse than words. She sank back down at the edge of the stable, her head pounding. The letter had promised safety, a home, perhaps even dignity. But the truth loomed darker with every hour. Whoever had written those words, whether John Willard or some cruel impostor, was not coming. The sheriff appeared again late in the afternoon, his shadow stretching long across the dirt road. He stopped in front of her, adjusting the badge pinned to his vest. "Still here?" His voice was flat, edged with suspicion. Clara forced herself to meet his gaze. "I'm waiting," she said, though the word tasted hollow on her tongue. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. Then he tipped his hat, his eyes narrowing. "Wait too long in this town, and you'll find more trouble than you bargained for." He walked on, boots thudding against the boards, leaving Clara with his warning burning in her ears. By sundown, Clara May knew with sick certainty she was not simply forgotten. She was abandoned, dropped into a place that wanted her gone. And as darkness swallowed the town for the second night, she sensed something worse stirring in the shadows. Something was watching. Something waiting. The second night was worse than the first. The town slept, but Clara May could not. The air had a different weight to it, heavy, restless, like the town itself was holding its breath. Every sound struck her nerves raw, the low creak of the saloon, sign in the wind, the shuffle of boots somewhere unseen, the bark of a dog that cut off too suddenly. She sat on the splintered stable step, her carpetbag pressed tight to her side, listening to the silence grow sharper. Fear had a taste now, dry, metallic, like blood in her mouth. When the clock in the church steeple struck midnight, the sound echoed like a gunshot through the empty streets. And then, nothing. The stillness afterward was so complete, so unnatural. Clara's skin prickled with the sense that something or someone was near. She scanned the shadows. The black gaps between the buildings seemed to shift. She swore she saw a figure lingering by the mercantile, but when she blinked, it was gone. Clara wasn't a woman easily given to panic, but out here, alone, with no ally and no welcome, even. The shadows seemed to mock her. She wondered if the townsfolk were right. Maybe she was a fool, maybe worse. A stray tossed to the dirt, waiting for the buzzards. Then, soft and trembling, came the sound that froze her heart. A child sobbed out. It wasn't the wail of hunger or pain. It was quiet, broken, as though whoever wept was trying not to be heard. The sound floated from the churchyard, carried thin on the night air. Clara stiffened. Her first thought that it was a trick, that someone meant to lure her from her spot, draw her into the dark where no one would ask questions if she disappeared. But the sob came again, fragile, shivering, and against her better judgment. She stood out, her shoes scraped softly against the dust as she crossed the street, every nerve screaming at her to turn back. The church loomed ahead, its white paint chipped, its door hanging crooked. The cry came again, close now. Clara rounded the steps and her breath caught. There, curled against the wooden post, was a child. A girl no older than 7, thin as a reed, with hair tangled and clothes torn at the seams. She clutched a rag doll to her chest, rocking herself slowly, her shoulders jerking with each silent sob. Clara's first instinct was to step back, to wonder if she was seeing a ghost. No child belonged alone at midnight in a place like this. But the girl's small hand trembled as she rubbed at her eyes, and Clara knew this was flesh and blood. She crouched carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Child, what are you doing here?" The girl looked up, her face pale in the moonlight, eyes too big for her face. She said nothing at first, just studied Clara as though weighing whether she was friend or threat. Then, without warning, the child leaned forward, her voice breaking the silence like a blade cutting through cloth. "Can you be my mommy?" The words struck Clara like a bullet. Not loud, not desperate, but raw, honest, piercing. It was not a question a child should ever have to ask, and the weight of it made Clara's throat close. For a moment, she could only stare, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. The town hadn't wanted her. No man had come for her. Yet here, in the middle of the night, a child, a stranger, alone, was asking her for the one thing she herself had thought she would never be wanted. Needed. Clara reached out a shaking hand, not sure whether to comfort the girl or to steady herself. Before she could speak, a heavy bootstep thudded against the boardwalk behind her. Her head snapped up. A figure stood in the dark near the church gate, watching. The child stiffened, clutching the doll tighter, her lips pressed tight as if she dared not speak again. Clara felt the chill slice through her veins. Whoever that was, it wasn't there. By accident. And in that moment, Clara May realized she had walked straight into something far more dangerous than being forgotten. Asterisk. Clara's blood ran cold as the shadow shifted near the church gate. The figure didn't move forward, didn't speak, just stood, a dark outline against the weak glow of the oil lamps, watching. The girl beside her pressed tighter against the post, clutching her ragged doll until its stuffing strained at the seams. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her eyes fixed on the figure with a terror that told Clara this was no stranger to her. Clara forced her voice steady. "Who's there?" No answer. only the scrape of leather on wood as the figure turned and melted back into the dark. The silence that followed was suffocating. The girl trembled, her face hidden against her knees. Clara reached out slowly, resting, her hand on the child's thin shoulder. The bone beneath felt too sharp, as though she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. "It's all right," Clara whispered, though she knew it wasn't. The girl raised her head just enough for the moonlight to catch her eyes. They were wide, glassy, the eyes of someone who had seen too much. Her lips quivered as she repeated the words that had already carved themselves into Clara's soul. "Can you be my mommy?" Clara's throat burned. She wanted to say yes, to promise safety, but her words tangled in fear. Who had been watching? Them? Why was this child alone? And why did she cling to Clara as though she had already lost everyone else? Before Clara could gather herself, the sound of boots struck the boardwalk again, this time heavier, deliberate. Sheriff Holt stepped into the lamplight, his badge catching a glint of silver. His eyes fell on Clara, then dropped to the girl huddled at her feet. His jaw tightened. "Step away from her," he ordered. Clara stiffened. "She's just a child. She's trouble." The sheriff's voice cracked like a whip. He moved closer, his shadow long and harsh across the church steps. "Her ma's been in the ground 6 months. Her pa drinks himself blind and mean. That girl's been running wild ever since, sleeping where she can, begging from whoever's soft enough to listen. Most folks know better than to get tangled up with her." Clara's chest ached at his words. She looked at the girl, small and silent, her bare feet smudged with dirt, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. "She's alone," Clara said softly. "No child should be alone like this." The sheriff's face hardened. "You don't know this town, miss. Strays don't last long here. Not animals, not men, not children. You'd best mind your own survival before you go tacking on someone else's burden." The cruelty of the warning hit harder than the heat of the day. Clara's fingers curled into fists, the letter in her bag suddenly worthless compared to the weight of the child pressed against her. The sheriff tipped his hat in a gesture that carried no kindness. Word to the wise: best not get attached. Around here, the ones who care too much end up buried first. With that, he walked away, his boots pounding against the boards, each step echoing like a coffin nail driven into the ground. The girl looked up at Clara, her lips pale, her eyes pleading without words. Clara's heart twisted painfully. This was no burden. This was a child abandoned, forgotten, unwanted. A mirror of her own fate. "Listen to me," Clara whispered, her voice fierce now, cutting through her fear. "I don't care what they say. You're not trouble. You're not a burden. You're—" She stopped, the words sticking in her throat. But before she could say it aloud, a sound cut her off. The creak of a door. A laugh, low and ugly, carrying across the dark street. A man's figure swayed in the lamplight outside. The saloon, a bottle in his hand, his boots dragging through the dirt as he turned toward them. The girl froze. Her tiny hands clutched Clara's arm in panic, her body rigid with terror. And Clara May understood in that single, shocking instant. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just any drunk. He was the reason this child had asked a stranger to be her mother. The drunk's laugh slithered across the street like a rattlesnake. It was not the laugh of a man amused, but of one who had already decided who would suffer for his anger. Clara felt the girl's small fingers dig into her arm, sharp as needles. The child's entire body shook, and she didn't need to speak for Clara to understand. This was him, the father. He staggered closer, bottle swinging from one hand, his boots dragging through the dirt as though the ground itself hated to carry him. His face caught the lamplight, unkempt beard, eyes hollowed out by drink. lips twisted into something that was neither smile nor snarl. He looked less like a man and more like a predator caught halfway between hunger and rage. Well, he slurred, stopping at the bottom of the church steps. His voice was gravel soaked in whiskey. Ain't this a picture? My little Annie curled up with some stranger. That your game now, girl? Crawl into anyone who'll give you a crumb? The girl Annie buried her face into Clara's sleeve. Clara's jaw tightened, fear pounding through her veins, but she forced her voice steady. She was alone. I found her crying. No child should be left in the dark like this. The man's gaze snapped to her, and in that instant she saw it, the venom that came not just from drink, but from years of bitterness. No child? His laugh cracked in the night, sharp and ugly. He raised the bottle, pointing it at Clara like a weapon. Lady, you don't know what you're talking about. She ain't worth the trouble. That one's cursed. Trouble's all she brings. The words hit Clara like a slap. Not because she believed them, but because he did, and the town, she realized, probably did too. That was why they all looked the other way. Why the sheriff had warned her. Why the whispers had cut her down before she'd even spoken a word. They thought Annie was doomed. And by extension, so was Clara May if she dared to take her side. The man staggered up the steps, his boots thudding against the wood, closer, closer. He reached for Annie, his fingers claw-like, the stench of whiskey choking the air. Get up, he growled at the girl. You're coming home. Annie's scream was small but piercing, the kind of sound that seared straight into the soul. She clung tighter to Clara, desperate, trembling. Clara's heart hammered. Everything inside her screamed to run, to get away from this nightmare. But something stronger rooted her to the spot. She pulled Annie behind her, rising to her feet, and her voice tore through the night sharper than she'd ever heard it. No. The man froze, blinking as though he'd been slapped. Then the rage came, thick and choking, twisting his face into something monstrous. No, he spat. You think you can tell me what's mine? Some washed-up mail-order tramp nobody wanted? The word stung, but Clara didn't flinch. She held her ground, Annie's small fingers gripping the back of her dress. Her voice, low and iron, cut through his drunken fury. You had your chance to be her father. Look at her starving, scared, begging strangers for help. You don't own her. You abandoned her. The silence that followed was thick as tar. Men leaned out of the saloon doorway, watching. A woman across the street paused with her broom. Eyes narrowed but unmoving. No one stepped forward. No one spoke. The whole town seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if Clara would stand or be broken. The man let out a low, rumbling growl, smashing his bottle against the post. Glass shattered, spraying across the steps. He raised the jagged neck in his fist, the lamplight glinting off the broken edges. You don't tell me how to raise what's mine, he snarled. You stand in my way, you'll bleed for it. Annie whimpered behind her, but Clara did not move. For the first time in her life, she felt something anchor her to the ground stronger than fear. She was no longer just Clara May, the forgotten bride. She was the wall between a child and the man who meant to destroy her. The town could watch. The sheriff could look the other way. But Clara May knew this. If she let Annie go now, the girl was finished. And so, with a voice steady as steel, she said it again, louder, clearer, and final. No. Asterisk, the broken bottle in the man's fist glinted under the lamplight like a crude blade. His breath came ragged, hot with whiskey and hate. His eyes fixed on Clara with a fever that promised blood. Saloon had gone quiet. Men leaned against the doorway, their drinks half raised, grins flickering at the promise of violence. No one moved to stop him. No one lifted a hand to help her. Clara felt the town's judgment pressing in from every shadow. To them, she was Still just a mail order mistake astray with no claim here. If she bled on those church steps, most would turn away. Muttering that she brought it on herself, the man lifted the jagged glass higher. "Step aside," he growled, his words thick and low. "She's mine. You ain't nothin' here. Nothin'." Behind Clara, Annie clung tighter, her fingers digging into the back of Clara's dress like claws. The little girl didn't cry. This time, she was silent, rigid, as if she had already learned that begging only made him worse. That silence hit Clara harder than the threat of the bottle. She planted her feet. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "You'll have to go through me." The man blinked, stunned for half a breath, then his mouth twisted into something. Between a sneer and a snarl. "Through you? Lady, you don't even know where you are. This town don't care if you live or die. You think anyone here's gonna bury you if I split you open right now?" His words weren't bluffs. Clara could see it in his eyes. This was a man who had already chosen cruelty over humanity long ago. A chair scraped inside the saloon. A man muttered, "Let it be. Holt'll deal with it." But the sheriff was nowhere in sight. The law was. Just another shadow in this place, and shadows didn't save lives. Clara's mind raced. She had nothing but a carpetbag, a letter that meant nothing, and her own 2 hands. Yet in that moment, she realized something. She had already lost everything once. She had come here with nothing, and this town had made sure she knew it. But Annie, this small, terrified girl, still had something left to lose. Her future. Her life, and Clara would not let him take that too. The man lunged. Clara seized the nearest thing she could. Broken board splintered from the church step. She swung it wide, the wood cracking against his arm. He howled, stumbling back, the bottle dropping and shattering against the dirt. Blood streaked across his wrist where the glass bit him, but his rage only deepened. "You'll pay for that," he hissed. He lunged again, fists raised, but this time a different sound split the night, the click of a hammer pulled back. Sheriff Holt stood across the street, revolver drawn, his badge gleaming in the lamplight. His voice rang out sharp as, "Hey, Whip, that's enough." The drunk froze, chest heaving, sweat and blood shining on his skin. His eyes darted to the sheriff, then back to Clara, seething with hatred. "You protecting her now, Holt?" He spat. "The mail order trash and the cursed brat?" The sheriff's jaw flexed, his revolver steady. "I'm protecting this town from a killing. Drop it." The man sneered but backed down a step, muttering curses under his breath. He wiped his bloody wrist on his shirt, glaring at Clara with eyes that promised this wasn't over. Then he staggered back into the dark, disappearing toward the saloon. The sheriff lowered his gun but didn't holster it. He looked at Clara, his expression hard. "You don't know what you've stepped into," he said quietly. "That man's meaner than most snakes, and this town, it don't care enough to stop him if he comes back." Clara swallowed, her heart still pounding, her grip tight on the splintered board. She looked down at Annie, who clung to her still, small but unbroken. "I don't care," Clara said, her voice raw but steady. "She asked me if I could be her mother, and I will not turn my back." The sheriff studied her, eyes narrowing as if weighing her words against the weight of the town itself. Then he nodded once, slow and grim. "You just made yourself an enemy." "You can't afford," he warned. Clara knew he was right. But as she pulled Annie close, she also knew this. Fear had ruled her long enough. The West was unforgiving, but she was done being unwanted. Now she was something else, a fighter. The church bell tolled noon, but its hollow clang carried no blessing. It was a summons. A warning. By the time Clara stepped onto the street, Annie's hand clutched in hers. Half the town had already gathered. Men leaned on rifles, women whispered. Behind handkerchiefs, children peered from behind skirts. A circle had formed, and in the center stood the man who claimed to be Annie's father. His face was still bruised from the bottle incident, his wrist wrapped in a filthy rag. His eyes burned with vengeance. Clara felt every gaze pierce her as if she were already guilty, already condemned. The word outside her hung in the air unspoken, heavier than the dust. "There she is," the man barked, his voice sharp as a whip. Crack. "The thief. The harlot who thinks she can steal what's mine." Annie flinched, shrinking behind Clara's skirts. Clara's hand tightened protectively over the girl's trembling fingers. Sheriff Holt stood at the edge of the circle, arms folded, revolver holstered, but his stance taut, coiled. His eyes flicked from Clara to the man, measuring the storm about to break. "You all hear me," the father shouted to the crowd. "This woman ain't no mother. She ain't nothin' but stagecoach trash left behind by some man too smart to take her. She ain't got no right to that girl, my girl." Murmurs rippled. Some nodded. Others looked down, ashamed, unwilling to meet Clara's eyes. Not one voice rose in her defense. Clara's throat tightened, but she stepped forward anyway. Annie, glued to her side. "She asked me to be her mother," Clara said, her voice carrying more strength than she felt. "And I will not abandon her." The man laughed, bitter and cruel. "Ain't up to you, woman. This town knows me. They know what's mine. You think they'll stand with you? You think anyone here's fool enough to pick a stranger over blood?" He turned to the crowd, arms spread wide, bloodied rag dangling from his wrist. "Tell her. Tell this whore she's nothin' here. Tell her she don't belong." The silence that followed was worse than any shout. Clara felt it like a weight pressing her chest. They wouldn't speak for her. They wouldn't lift a finger. Her knees wanted to buckle, but Annie's hand kept her standing. The child's grip was so small, yet in it Clara felt an anchor. If she fell, Annie would be dragged down with her. She lifted her chin. Her words came not as a plea, but as a fire. "You all know what he is," Clara said, scanning their faces. "You've heard her cries. You've seen the bruises. And you've turned away." A woman gasped. A man spat in the dirt. But still no one moved. Clara pressed on, her voice rising with each word. "If you let him take her now, if you stay silent again, you ain't just cowards. You're accomplices. You'll have her blood on your hands, same as his." The man snarled, lunging forward, grabbing Clara by the arm. Annie screamed. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but still no one stepped in. "Enough of this," he hissed, yanking hard. "She's mine. The girl's mine, and no mail order stray is gonna stop me." Pain shot through Clara's arm, but she didn't scream. She locked eyes with him, refusing to look away, even as his spit flecked her cheek dot, and then another sound split the air. The click of a revolver. Hammer pulled back. Sheriff Holt's gun was leveled at the man's chest. His voice cut like steel. "Let her go." The crowd froze. No one breathed. The town had lived too long in the comfort of silence, but now the law had spoken. The man's grip tightened on Clara's arm. His eyes burned with hate, but something darker flickered there now. Fear. Clara's heart thundered. Around her, the town seemed to hold its breath. The next moment would decide everything. And that's where it broke, suspended, fragile, the whole world waiting. Asterisk, the street was dead still. Sheriff Holt's revolver didn't waver. Sunlight glinted off the barrel, sharp and merciless, while sweat rolled down the man's temple as he clutched Clara's arm. "You wouldn't shoot me," he hissed, teeth bared. "Not for her. Not for some stray woman nobody wanted." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Try me." The father's grip faltered, just enough for Clara to wrench free. She staggered back, shielding Annie behind her, heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. "You all watching this?" The man spat at the crowd. "You gonna let her steal my blood right out from under me?" You gonna let this sheriff side with some worthless bride over one of your own? The words struck the townsfolk like stones. Some muttered. Some shuffled their boots. None answered. Clara's voice cut through their silence. You know what he's done. You've heard Annie cry at night. You've seen her bruises, and still you say nothing. Her eyes swept the faces around her, daring them to look away. Every time you turned your back, you told him it was fine. Every time you kept quiet, you told her she didn't matter. Well, I'm telling you she does. She matters. Her voice cracked, not from weakness but from the weight of the truth. She dropped to one knee beside Annie, wrapping an arm around the trembling girl. If none of you will stand for her, then I will, alone if I must. The father barked a laugh, mean and hollow. That's it? Words? You think words make you a mother? Then, quick as a rattler, he lunged, grabbing for Annie. The sheriff fired. The gunshot split the world in two. The man froze, a red bloom spreading across his shirt. His face twisted in disbelief before he toppled backward into the dirt, dust rising like smoke around his still body. For a long moment, no one moved. The echo of the shot clung to the air, a ghost that refused to fade. Annie buried her face in Clara's dress, sobbing. Clara held her close, her own hands trembling as the weight of what had just happened settled on her chest. The sheriff lowered his gun, his voice flat. Wasn't for her. Wasn't for Clara. It was for justice. Something this town's been too scared to face. The crowd shifted. Some turned away. Some stared at Clara as if seeing her for the first time. Shame stained their silence, but still they said nothing. Clara rose slowly, holding Annie's hand. Dust clung to her dress, her hair, her skin, but her spine was iron. She faced them all. You can stay silent if you want. But don't you dare say you didn't see. Don't you dare say you didn't know. You all knew. Her words hung heavy. A woman at the back sobbed quietly. A man removed his hat, staring at the ground. But most just stood there, locked in the prison of their own cowardice. The sheriff stepped forward. You'll find no charges against her. Not while I wear this badge. Annie stays with Clara, and if anyone here thinks otherwise, his hand hovered over his revolver, you'll answer to me. The message was clear. No one moved. Clara looked down at Annie. The girl's small hand tightened in hers, not out of fear now, but out of trust. Annie's whisper carried only for Clara to hear, trembling but sure. Can you really be my mommy? Tears burned Clara's eyes. She bent low, pressing her forehead to Annie's. Her answer was not loud, not for the crowd or even the sheriff. It was for the girl alone. I already am. And with that, Clara turned, walking Annie away from the circle of silence, away from the man who had claimed her, away from a town that had refused to choose until justice was forced into its lap. The street stayed hushed, the crowd parting like water. None dared stop her. None dared speak. For the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Clara May did not feel unwanted. She carried something stronger than acceptance, stronger than belonging. She carried a child who had chosen her, and that choice was worth more than any promise ever written in ink. The frontier was cruel, silent, and unforgiving. But in that silence, a new bond had been forged, louder than any gunshot, stronger than any bloodline, a bond no one could break.